Hello and welcome to the Fuel Run Recover podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchuk, registered dietitian, running coach, marathon runner, and mom. This season, we're breaking down running's biggest trends, hot topics, and myths, and turning them into practical nutrition and training advice you can actually use every day. Let's get into it. Hey there. Before we get into this week's episode, I want to just take a minute to invite you to a free webinar that I'm hosting on Wednesday, May the 6th. It's my Fuel Smarter, Run Stronger webinar. If you are stuck in a running rut, if you are constantly battling food cravings, if you just cannot seem to get any changes on the scale or with your body composition, and you're tired of bonking on your long runs and raiding the kitchen every night like a hungry trash panda, then I really want you to save a spot and join me live for this workshop. In it, I'm going to share with you why most of the nutrition advice that you hear online is just wrong when it comes to runners. And honestly, why a lot of the nutrition advice that you hear from family, friends, or maybe even your doctor is not great advice if you're a runner. And I'll also be sharing with you the key strategies that you need to really level up your running performance, have better quality workouts, start getting closer to your PR goals, and most of all, stop constantly battling cravings and feel like food is just so complicated, so confusing, and so overwhelming. So once again, this is my Fuel Smarter, Run Stronger webinar. It's on May the 6th, and you can save your spot for this event at the link in the show notes. All right, hope to see you there. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel Run Recover podcast, where we are talking about electrolytes. What are they, and when do you need them, and all the ins and outs around electrolytes? Because electrolytes are absolutely everywhere right now. I don't know what your social media feeds and algorithms are showing you these days, but I mean, every brand, every supplement company, like everything is just... we're going crazy on the electrolytes. And what I find the most interesting about the marketing around these products is how much there has been a shift from marketing specifically toward endurance athletes, who generally are the ones actually requiring electrolyte supplementation and electrolyte products. How much of that has shifted toward kind of everyday use and everyday use, yes, for athletes, but also everyday use for kind of anybody and everybody to be taking and using these products. And I mean, for sure, if you look at like the population as a whole, there's a lot more non-endurance athletes than endurance athletes, a lot more sedentary people than highly active people. And so there's a benefit financially for companies to have everyone buying their products, not just the athletes specifically who like really need them, so you can see how there's just a big benefit to market to beyond just, specifically people who are training for endurance events. But what it's led to is a lot of confusion around electrolytes and where they come from outside of buying an electrolyte supplement. And a lot of people are kind of using it on the daily. And there's sort of this like narrative that you need to add it to your fluids, right? You need to drink electrolytes in your water because without them, you are not getting hydrated. Like if you don't have the electrolytes in that water at the same time that you're drinking that water, water alone is not doing its job of actually hydrating you. And that could not be further from the truth. That is a crazy rumor. I don't know where that came from. I don't know why people say that. Like it's just wild. I mean, human beings and all animals on this planet, right, have been drinking plain water, plenty of it, and we are perfectly adequately hydrated with plain water. If we required electrolytes in our water in order to survive and avoid dehydration, like none of us would be here, right? The life on this planet as we know it would have already ceased to exist. So no, water on its own is perfectly hydrating. You do not need electrolytes in your water. Because surprise, surprise, we get plenty of electrolytes from the food we eat on a daily basis. So let's back up a little bit. What is an electrolyte? So an electrolyte is it's a mineral that is responsible for the electrical signals in our body. So this is the electrical signals that are responsible for muscle contraction. So that's like our skeletal muscle that we're using when we do things like running or any physical movement, right? But it's also the muscle that is responsible for keeping our heart beating. It's also the electrical signals that keep our brain functioning. So all of that stuff is regulated and requires a balance of electrolytes. So electrolytes are sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. And these electrolytes reside in different concentrations in different parts of our bodies. And so what we need to understand is that when we are losing electrolytes in our sweat, which we do, when we sweat, we're losing electrolytes in our sweat. But because of the location of these electrolytes in our bodies, the vast majority of those sweat losses are going to be sodium. So we don't need to aggressively be replacing other electrolytes because they are not lost in our sweat in nearly the same concentration that sodium is. The vast majority of electrolytes that we are losing in our sweat is going to be salt, which is sodium. And that's the key for replacement. Now, to kind of take it a step further, right? When do we actually need to replace electrolytes? Well, we only need to replace electrolytes like in this particular moment in time, like that electrolyte replacement only needs to happen when the losses of salt exceed what we would get from a normal meal and snack schedule. Because again, our food has electrolytes. There are plenty of foods that we eat on a daily basis that have a ton of sodium, right? People, generally speaking, are not walking around sodium deficient. We are not walking around with sodium depleted diets. Our diets here in North America have a ton of salt. Even a very healthy diet, right? Like it does not take a lot of condiments, bread, any amount of like processed foods, right? Like it doesn't take a lot of that stuff to easily get in a very healthy amount of electrolytes, right? We're doing fine when it comes to sodium intake from our food. Now, are there certain people on certain diets or with certain health conditions who do need more sodium than the rest of us? Absolutely. But that's a case by case basis. That's something specifically they need to be working on with like their healthcare team, right? For most of us, right, very generally speaking, sodium is not a concern. It's not something we don't get enough of. So most of us, we're going to be training, running for, maybe an hour, 90 minutes at a time. We're going to have one day of the week that we're doing a long run. So we're going to be out for multiple hours at a time during that long run, right? But for most of us who are not professional athletes, we're not doing hours and hours and hours of training on a daily basis. We are doing our workout and then we're eating a recovery meal. And we're spending the rest of the day like doing our day jobs, right? We're going to work, we're sitting around. Maybe you're in a more active job. And those are some of the situations like if you are training, but you also have a very active job where you're doing like manual labor outside in the summer in the heat, right? You are sweating a lot and you're potentially losing a lot more salt in your sweat than you might be replacing with your regular meals and snacks, right? But again, that is not like the majority of people. Most of us are going to be inside in like our day jobs, sitting at our computers. Or at the very least working inside in like climate controlled conditions, where even if we're on our feet, we're not like losing buckets and buckets of sweat as we're working throughout the day. So for the most part, we're going to drink water and we're going to eat food that has electrolytes. So we don't need to be replacing electrolytes from electrolyte products, like adding things to our fluids, because we're already getting plenty of that from the food that we're eating it, right? And that goes for everything, sodium and potassium and magnesium and calcium, right? It's just in those instances, like during those very long runs, during those workouts on a really hot day, right? The times that we're not eating sources of sodium that an electrolyte replacement in our fluids can be beneficial. But the most important thing is that we're still replacing the fluids, right? Because without fluids, we are not hydrated, right? It doesn't take just salt to hydrate us, it takes fluids to hydrate us. And so if we are aggressively replacing sodium, right, taking really concentrated electrolyte products, taking a bunch of salt capsules, things like that during a workout, during a long run, and we are not drinking enough fluid, we are not doing a better job of rehydrating or maintaining hydration than if we weren't consuming the sodium, right? At the end of the day, the fluids is still the most important thing. So what I want you to take away from this episode and what I want you to do is understand your fluid replacement needs in the sense of like knowing how much and when you need to drink during your long runs or those hard workouts, especially as we're getting into warmer months, making sure that you know how much fluid you need to maintain your hydration, and then checking that box, making sure you're doing a good job of replacing those fluids before we go crazy with the electrolytes. And again, outside of training, if you're eating regular meals and snacks, which you should be for the carbohydrates and the protein and the other nutrients, you're probably doing just fine in terms of getting in enough electrolytes outside of your training. Now, what we want to be careful of course, is the flip side of that. And maybe this is where things have kind of, maybe this is where some of this has come from, is people being concerned about what happens if we are drinking way too much water during a long run or during a race, and we're not replacing any electrolytes at all. So this can happen in a situation where we are losing a lot of sweat, we're losing a lot of sodium, and we are only replacing the water. We are not replacing the sodium. And again, this is going to be happening potentially during long events. So like if you're running a marathon, if you're doing a trail race or an ultra race where you're out there for like hours and hours and hours, you're losing a lot of sweat and a lot of sodium, but you're only drinking plain water and not replacing enough electrolytes. So what can happen at this point is we can dilute the level of sodium in our blood. And this is a condition called hyponatremia, so low blood sodium. Now, this is what we really want to avoid as athletes because it can be fatal, right? Having a blood sodium level that dips way too low, this causes an electrolyte imbalance. And like I said, electrolytes are critical for keeping those electrical signals in our body functioning properly. So without it, muscle contraction can't occur. Brain function is going to be compromised. And so these are very serious, right? We want to avoid these conditions. But I think that sometimes like the pendulum has swung so far the other direction that now we are taking in so many electrolytes. Like we're just so aggressive with the electrolyte replacement. We've kind of forgotten completely about the fluids or the fact that most of us are getting enough electrolytes from our daily diet. We don't need to include them on every single run or just as part of our day-to-day nutrition plan. So if you like the taste of an electrolyte product and it's not like so crazy high in sodium, like there are some brands that we're talking, they have like 1,000 milligrams of sodium in a packet. And so if you're a very salty sweater during a long run or during a race, that might be the perfect product for you. But you do not need to be sitting around sipping on 1,000 milligrams of sodium per hour, or, even 1,000 extra milligrams of sodium just throughout your day to day, right? When you're just, at your day job, sitting at your computer. So if you like the taste of a product, it's not crazy high in sodium, it helps you drink more and it helps keep you hydrated because you are drinking fluids, that's okay. But it's not something we need to be spending money on just for like daily use. I know that a lot of these products aren't like tremendously expensive, but maybe some of them are. I don't know. I obviously don't buy a lot of different electrolyte products. I, have a few that I like for during my runs specifically, but I'm certainly not sitting here like drinking Tailwind or Scratch as I'm recording this podcast for you. So you don't need spending money on that for daily use. You can absolutely just drink water and just eat food, and you will be completely fine We just need a little bit of electrolyte replacement during those long runs, during those long races, or again, if we're training hard and it's a hot day and we are losing a lot of sweat and a lot of sodium. Otherwise, you are going to be just fine. So save your money, keep that stuff for when you need it during your workouts. And I hope that you found this episode helpful. If you have more questions about electrolytes, about your hydration and fueling needs, and really help putting together a strategy that you feel confident in for your training and for your races, that's exactly what I help runners do. You can learn more about all of the different ways that we can work together inside my online programs with one-on-one coaching, or I have everything down to a simple fueling ebook for runners. All of that you can get at the link in the show notes. All right, I hope that you enjoyed this week's episode, and we will see you right back here next week. Bye for now. Podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.